Hello, and welcome to the Life Works podcast. Joining me today is Marti MacEwan. Marti is a licensed professional counselor and coach who specializes in stage fright, performance anxiety, and fear of public speaking for people in business, the arts, the professions, politics, and academics. Marti, it is awesome to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for being
Thank you. Oh, it's so much fun for me to be here and talk about what I love to do and to share it with people and share it with you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you. The reason why I wanted to have you on, Marti, is to give our audience some definitions, some foundational definitions around stage fright, performance anxiety, and imposter syndrome, uncover the sources of those concepts, and share some real strategies that they can take away with them for curing them.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Yeah. So you yourself at one time struggled with stage fright. Tell us a little bit about that and how you helped yourself.
I didn't know I had stage fright until I started to learn to sing. I'd always wanted to be a singer and had never taken lessons. I'd been in choirs, kind of hiding in the soprano section, you know. Right. But I just kind of got an idea that I'd like to take it on for real and learn really how to sing and know that I was singing well enough that I could feel confident in it, you know, and that anybody would want to listen. Yeah. So I signed up for a voice lesson, and the teacher said, you know, to go la 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 la. So I did, and then she had me do breathing exercise, all that sort of thing, and everything was just fine. And then she said, "Sing me something," and I just went, oh, I mean, it was a totally involuntary reaction to singing something by myself, like a song, not the la la la's. I could do that, but singing a song in front of someone else completely knocked me off my socks. Wow. And I couldn't make a sound. Honestly, I couldn't. And she was a little scared, and I was a little scared because I was just so frozen. And then she said, well, just sing Mary Had a Little Lamb, you know, because she was thinking like, I must be thinking I need to sing some aria from an opera or, you know, the latest rock song or something. Right. I couldn't even do that. I completely froze for, I would guess 2 minutes. And I finally went, Mary, you know, I was tense and shaking and boy, it was a shock to me that happened to me. And it was totally involuntary. It wasn't anything I knew would happen or even suspected would happen. And actually, I tried to quit singing a number of times. And you know how when you really want to do something and you try to quit because it's too hard or whatever reason, but you keep coming back around to it, you know? Yeah, it finds you. Coming back around to it, you know, and your instincts are taking you in a direction, I think. So that's what happened. But it wasn't until maybe 6 months into it. She would have a recital every 3 months where we would get up and sing in a dinner theater kind of situation for our friends and family. And every single time that came around, I was standing in the wings and I was shaking and sweating. My heart was racing like crazy. And you don't sing really well, you know, when you're all tense and scared. So there was one time I remember very clearly, I was just standing in the wings, and my body was just in, you know, shakes. But my mind wasn't. It's like, it was like I knew the music, I knew the songs. My brain was not worried, but my body was still reacting like it was tigers coming out of the woods. And I thought, well, isn't that fascinating? And at the same time, I was studying some therapy techniques in my counseling office that have to do with reducing the fight, flight, or freeze response on a physical and psychological level at the same time. And it was working beautifully with people for all kinds of things, for phobias and depression and anxiety of other kinds, whatever it might be. So I thought, wait a minute, why don't I use those same techniques on myself, right? See what happens. So I went into my office by myself and I started to apply these methods. And little by little, or really a lot by a lot, if you're going to look at it in terms of whether you ever get over your stage fright or don't, right? I got less and less afraid. Just my physiological response diminished. But then I started working with people in my practice who were performers and speakers and guitar players and harp players and singers, and with the same techniques and the same theory underpinning where it comes from and what to do about it, they got over their stage fright.
Wow.
And then they could perform freely. It really did come from my own, like, physician heal thyself kind of thing, you know,
Sure.
Discovering that I had stage fright, that I had a little fear of public speaking earlier, but not such that it got in my way. But I had some insecurity about how I was being received in speaking, but it wasn't debilitating in any way whatsoever. It wasn't even anything I would ever do or think about doing anything about. But with singing, it came on like gangbusters, and there wasn't any singing if I was going to be suffering like that.
So at a foundational level, how do you define stage fright, performance anxiety, and imposter syndrome?
And imposter syndrome. I think it has to do with the specificity of it. In other words, my definition of stage fright, which is very broad, is the fear of doing anything for someone else's consideration or enjoyment. It doesn't mean to have a stage at all. Let's say you want to write a blog post and you're procrastinating on it and feeling tense about it and, you know, resisting it. Well, that's because you're putting something out there for someone else's consideration, right? By definition. And so in your mind, you have the idea that people are going to be observing you and evaluating you. I'd say that comes under the broad umbrella of stage fright. Or you're sitting in a meeting, and we've all had this experience. We're sitting in a meeting with a new group of people, and the leader of the meeting says, "Let's all go around the table and introduce ourselves."
Yeah.
Right? And so you're like, your turn is about 3/4 of the way around the table. I think we all know this one.
I'm laughing because I can totally relate with that.
And you can't hear anybody else what they're saying about themselves.
Right.
If there was a quiz at the end of the meeting, you'd remember all the people came after you.
Right.
So that's a form of stage fright that I think is very common and a lot of people would recognize. Sure. And really what it is that fight, flight, or freeze response kicking up when you are going to offer something for somebody else's consideration or enjoyment. And you're all concerned about that. You're more concerned about that than you are about actually providing the information for their consideration or enjoyment, right? That's the broad definition of stage fright, to come back to your definition. Performance anxiety, I think, has more to do with specifically something where it's a little more a formal thing, like a test-taking situation.
Okay.
And an actor in a play, you have to perform. So there's an element of evaluation. There's an element of how well are you going to do at this? There's some stakes involved. So interviews, I would put in performance anxiety. Now, social anxiety going into a party situation, I wouldn't put that in performance anxiety unless you think you're performing. To me, imposter syndrome is fundamental insecurity about your abilities. It's more pervasive. It's not as situation dependent. When a person really has imposter syndrome, it's awful. I mean, it makes you dread going to work in the morning. It makes you paranoid. People know something about you that you don't know that they know. It's just an awful mindset to have to live with. But it could have nothing to do with performing whatsoever. It could just be you're walking around in the world being a fraud, which is awful to think about yourself. I suppose they all do come under the heading of stage fright, and I address those in my work. But I think they have a little bit of a different angle to them. They're just definitions. So any individual person, their situation is unique. Doesn't really need the label.
What are the sources inside of us of each of these? And do they all come from different sources, or do they all come from the same source?
If you talk about it broadly, they all come from the same source. There's something within us that is essentially in conflict with what's being asked of us. But what that is in each individual person is distinct. When I discovered that I had such a severe fear of singing, and I sat myself down to figure out why did I have this and what to do about it, I started using some techniques that are introspective as well as mind-body techniques. It's a kind of a, it happens simultaneously. People introspect on what's going on inside, and then use these techniques to get more information about what's this about? What do I have this associated with in my brain? The first thing that came up for me is a 4th grade incident. I had a crush on this kid, Steve, and I wanted to impress Steve. Now, Steve and I sat in the front desks of our homeroom, and I decided I wanted to dress up to the nines for Steve that day, asked my mother to take me shopping to get a new dress. I remember the dress absolutely specifically. It was a coral colored dress with flowers on it. It had a little belt around the back, and I had white shoes on. I got new shoes. I mean, I was somebody, right? Yeah. So I was going to impress Steve. And in our school, there was a rule that you had to be in your seat by the time the bell stopped ringing, or you were late and you'd get docked. So I was very nervous about this whole prospect. But I was standing outside in the hallway waiting, and the bell started to ring, and I went, oh my God, I have to get in. And I ran in the room. I ran up the middle aisle toward my seat, and only to realize that the janitor had waxed the floor the night before. And I slipped on my shoe, went over my head, my dress over my head, right in front of Steve and the rest of the class and the teacher, and they were all howling.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
That's literally the definition of a nightmare.
It wasn't funny to me.
Oh God. So
everyone else was laughing. Now, what I realized as I started, first of all, I was surprised that came up. I never thought about that 4th grade incident before. Yeah. I mean, I thought about it before, but I never would have connected it with a fear of singing. So, but I started to clear up the emotional charge that I felt on that. You know how you remember an incident and you go, oh God, that. Well, I started to use the techniques that I'm talking about to clear up the emotional charge on that incident. And that's what I did that first time I started to work with myself, until I couldn't dredge up any more shame about it or any more embarrassment about it. And it just didn't even feel important anymore to me. And the other thing that happened while I was doing that was that I realized they weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at a funny situation. If I had been one of the kids in that class and somebody else had slipped on their brand new shoes like that, I would have laughed too. It would have been a reflex, right? But it wasn't until I got that emotional charge off of that issue for myself that I could change my perspective. Actually, I didn't change my perspective. My perspective changed. And it was no longer about me feeling humiliated or making a fool of myself. That was the connection between that 4th grade incident and what I decided about that incident and what I decided about myself and what happened to me when I got up to put myself out as a singer. In a way, it's like, I thought singers were cool, and I'm not cool. I'm this little kid who humiliated herself. So what am I doing up there singing in front of people? So what happens in the brain is that our brains make those associations. So when I broke the association with that first incident and feeling the fool, to realizing I wasn't the fool, it wasn't about me at all. I'm fond of saying that it wasn't that all of a sudden at the end of that session with myself, I went, oh, now I can sing. No, I didn't know if it was going to translate to the actual situation or not, but it did. Wow. The next time I got up to sing, I was about half as nervous.
Wow.
But it wasn't because I decided anything. That's the key here. It wasn't because I decided anything like, okay, I'm fine now. No. Or I fed myself affirmations or anything like that. It was a shift in my physiological perception of the situation. Actually, it was a shift in my amygdala's perception of the situation, such that it was not afraid. It was not making that association anymore with the hippocampus, memories in the hippocampus, and didn't cascade down into a fight, flight, or freeze response, which means my body didn't react, which meant I was calmer. But it wasn't a cognitive process.
Wow.
That makes sense?
It does. And it actually prompts a couple of questions for me here. So in your mind, there was a connection, albeit maybe an unnatural one, but there was a connection between this fourth grade incident, this really humiliating fourth grade incident, and your ability to sing?
Yes, I would tweak that a little bit. I would say there was a connection between my perception of that incident that got lodged in my memory banks and my feeling of deserving to sing. The hippocampus in the brain is a little kind of horn shape about right back there in your limbic system, is largely has to do with memory storage. And the hippocampus stores memories that are important or might be useful in the future. And the amygdala, that's two little areas right on the front of those of the hippocampus, is the part of our brain that is on the lookout for emotional danger. So the memory of that fourth grade incident contained meaning that I had ascribed to it as a fourth grader, but my body and my brain had ascribed meaning to that incident about who I am, what's okay, what's not okay for me to do, what's going to be painful in the future, what I should look out for not to have that happen again. And so those memories and the amygdala's being vigilant about watching out for danger situations is lodged in our systems. It's not our fault. It's not anything we're doing. But it gets lodged there. And I think I have other reasons for feeling insecure that I could point to, and I continued to work on those in the same way. And every time I cleared up something where I felt like there was something about offering something to someone else that was my language, impeding my energy, I would clear that up, and then I got more and more comfortable and more comfortable. Because when you're tense and shaking, you don't sing very well. But so when you're more relaxed, you can sing better, and when you sing better, you get better feedback, and it's more fun, and then you get sing better, and then you can relax some more. So it becomes a positive reinforcing loop rather than a negative.
I want to sort of compare and contrast the meaning that you had at that time that you associated with that incident and the meaning that you have with it now post-work.
The meaning I have for it now is that it was funny, and I was just a little kid with a crush. What little kid doesn't have a crush? The incident certainly was about me. That happened to me. But the laughter wasn't about me. The laughter was about a slapstick moment that was just literally, objectively funny, and would have been funny if it had been me or anybody else. So the work divested that incident of its personal disruption. So when I think of it now, it makes me smile. I think it's funny. And partly is because when I tell the story, everybody else thinks it's funny too. And then they all go, "Aw."
And on some level, they can relate with you, right? Who among us has not had something humiliating happen in our lives?
To be honest, there were more things that held that in place than just that one incident. And circling back to your original question, I started right there in terms of figuring out why people have stage fright and what to do about it. It's not something you're born with. It's something that is a reaction to something that happened in your life. And it could be an incident like what I just described, or it could be a set of conditions. And one person in a workshop years ago said to me, well, what's the difference between this and just your family situation, for instance, right? Your cultural situation. I said, well, those are made up of instances. A whole slew of them, but instances. People said things, people looked at you a certain way, people taught you things.
One of the things I find interesting about what you're saying, too, is that it seems that we can carry these incidents with us for years. Like you said, that it took you some time to divest the emotional charge from that incident. And I know we're focusing on that specific incident, but so in your work, one of the things that you find is that people do carry these things with them for years?
Absolutely. As one of my clients years ago said, oh, you mean those things where you go to bed at night and you remember them and you just want to put your head over your pillow? And it doesn't have to be that kind of sharp memory, but people carry not only the events, the objective events, but the feelings that happened at the time and the meaning that we made out of them. Our brains record all of that. An analogy I use a lot is a hologram. If our consciousness, our individual consciousness, is like a holographic plate. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't know all the ins and outs and the physics of how holographic plates work, except that I know that there are images embedded in a holographic plate, and if you shine a laser at certain angles and hit that point, it will trigger that holographic image to pop up to assemble itself so that we can see it. So we're not always conscious at all of what's embedded in our holographic plate, if you will. The laser beam of our perception triggers it, right? Just like the laser beam in the holographic plate triggers that holographic image. So when the laser of our perception triggers that, it's like activating this hologram in ourselves. And that feels and looks real to us. And it has all of the actual what happened and the emotional reaction we had to it and the meaning that we assigned to it, all embedded in it. The work I do is that we actually activate that as best we can on purpose, but in a safe environment. Like I don't throw people up on a stage with 1,000 people.
Right.
But vicariously activate that part of our consciousness and then use techniques that will dismantle that. So that then when you put the laser beam of your attention on that point in your experience, nothing happens. And then you're free to do whatever you want to do without the encumbrance of this emotional charge that's left over from whatever. And as I say, it could be events or it could be conditions. It could be your critical father that you lived with for 15 years. One story was a guy who had a job where all of a sudden he needed to get up in front of people and make presentations that he hadn't had to do before. And he ran into his own fear of public speaking, you would call that, right? Well, among other things, one incident that he remembered was that he'd been in Montessori school for most of his early years, which is very freewheeling, and talk to his friends and choose what he wanted to do, and for whatever reason his family moved to a different city and he was put in Catholic school.
Oh wow.
Just the opposite. He was expected to sit in his seat and not say anything. Well, he was a very gregarious guy and he wanted to make friends, so he didn't know the difference, so he would talk in class, but the teacher got furious and called him up in front of the class and raked him over the coals for something that he hadn't even learned yet. And really, it was like a shocking experience for him. And when we cleared that incident up, he was much better able to make presentations because that incident wasn't dogging him on a subconscious level. One of the connections we made when we talked about it was that this shock of being brought up like that when he was trying to make friends and be liked, and it happened when he was standing up in front of the group having everybody looking at him. So some of the elements the associative elements were that he was standing up in front of a group and he was trying to make friends and be liked. So ta-da, same context. So when we cleared up that incident that had similar elements to it, he was much more comfortable because it didn't have the same meaning anymore. Saying that's just another example of it isn't the luck of the draw, it isn't you weren't born with it. And the happy news is that there's a reason. So we can get at that reason, clear it up so that's not activated.
What is happening biologically when we get stage fright?
Well, first it happens in our perceptions, right? So in all these examples that I'm giving you, there are some not necessarily literal similarities, but some kind of context or some kind of association that gets triggered by the present day situation. One of them is just plain visibility to other people. Seeing other people seeing you. My coin term for it is mirrored visibility. Many of the incidents that I've encountered with people have that element at the base, which is it's a situation where other people are seeing you and you're seeing that other people are seeing you. So let's just use that. So you come to a situation and you see people seeing you, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what's happening is that sensation or perception comes into your brain through the sensory apparatus. The amygdala picks up on it, checks with the hippocampus to see if there's a similar thing we should be afraid of. In the file folders of the memories of the hippocampus, is this something we should be on alert about? And if there is that connection, the amygdala then sends a signal, biochemical signal, to the thalamus and the pituitary glands, which then go down through the nervous system and to the adrenal glands, right above your kidneys, that go on alert and shoot out cortisol and adrenaline into your system. And that's what causes those symptoms. And then, because you're having those symptoms, your brain in response goes, oh my God, this must be really scary. the perception of something that you have an association with triggers that fight, flight, or freeze response from the amygdala into the body, and then the body then gives your brain the idea there must be actually something to be afraid of. So you can try to talk yourself out of it, but the prefrontal cortex, right up here, where your cognitive thinking processes are, and isn't the signal, when you're in a reactive mode, the signal from the prefrontal cortex is not as strong as to the amygdala. In other words, the part of you that says, it's okay, we're fine, I know what I'm doing, I'll be fine. That part is not as strong as the, oh my God, part.
And I wonder if the location of the amygdala being so close to our spinal column has anything to do with that.
Well, it's the limbic system in the middle of your brain, that is connected to the, the brain stem. But and it's also the vagus nerve. It hooks in there and goes around and down and into all of your viscera. The vagus nerve is part of the polyvagal system that triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. So when the vagus nerve is activated, it actually slows your system down. As opposed to the, maybe you remember from school, the sympathetic nervous system revs you up and the parasympathetic nervous system calms you down. On physiological ways in the autonomic nervous system where you don't have conscious control. So that's what happens physiologically. And then when we do this energy work, it has the function, because we can observe it, not that we know what the mechanism is, but because we can observe it, it literally disconnects that fight, flight, or freeze response from the perception. So the perception is still there. I can remember what happened in 4th grade, but the emotional and meaning response isn't. It changes the way that our bodies react to a perception. And it really works. I mean, the Rapid Relief from Stress and Distress class that I teach, it's a workshop, really, 2-hour workshop, demonstrates this. What we do is have people at the beginning of the class identify something that's bothering them. I mean, who doesn't have something that bothers them, right? Sure. And then we rate that from 0 to 10. So I might say I have a conflict at work. It might not have anything to do with stage fright or performing. I have a conflict at work and it's really bothering me and so on. And it's bothering me to a 9, let's say, out of 10. And then we go through these very specific mind-body energy exercises that we call, my colleague and I who developed this, Stephanie Eldringhoff and I developed this. We go through each of those exercises and again rate the intensity of that the perception, right, of that conflict at work or whatever it is. And predictably, the felt sense of it diminishes from the beginning to the end. So it's demonstrable. And I have a spreadsheet, in fact, of like over 150 instances of people and what happened to them with particular issue they're facing from the beginning to the end of the rapid relief process. This is that technique that we developed. Most recently, there was a woman in one of my classes who had a fear of technology. She had a PhD and she was quite the bright person, but she had an anxiety response about technology. And that was the thing that she chose to address in the Rapid Relief from Stress and Distress class. And she reported to me not long after that she had been able to figure out a program or something. Somebody was teaching her a program and she had no anxiety about it at all, which was a physiological difference. In other words, she just didn't have the anxiety. It wasn't that she had to talk herself out of it or give herself a lot of reassuring affirmations or something. Right. She just didn't have that reaction.
So what strikes me about what you're saying is that a lot of the work that you're doing is done in the conscious mind. Like you're reaching back, you're reaching back into some conscious memory, right? I mean, it's something that you can remember. You bring it to the fore, you process it, and you process it enough that eventually, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, that through the work, that eventually it gets refiled back into our subconscious mind as resolved?
Yeah, it's not threatening. The only tweak I would do on that is that it doesn't necessarily have to be something we're conscious of until we start working, and then, I didn't remember that 4th grade incident until it popped right up. And here's another little fun analogy. It's kind of like cafeteria plates. That's when pops up, oh, we can take care of the 4th grade incident. Oh yeah, then there was that time my dad told me not to sing so loud in front of my family. Okay, yeah. And then there was the time that, you know what I mean? Then there was the time that, these are real, then there was the time in middle school where I wanted to be in the glee club. It was singing, right? And my teacher looked at me with the saddest face after I had auditioned, and she said, you know, I'm so sorry, you're not a first soprano, you're a second soprano. I didn't know anything about music. I didn't know. I thought that meant, you know, like second chair violin, like,
right.
You're no good.
Yeah, no, it's not that at all.
It's not that at all. It has to do with the range your voice falls.
Right, the voice part, yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought it meant that I wasn't any good. So,
so
the cafeteria plate, the more of those that actually, like you say, got refiled more appropriately, and that the electrical charge on those memories was neutralized, then I was more and more free to sing without all that baggage.
Why is it important to overcome stage fright? Like, how do you see that benefiting someone?
Well, there are certainly practical ways and financial ways, and, you know, like for me, I wanted to sing, and then certainly getting over my stage fright was a necessary thing for me to learn how to sing. Sure. And to be confident and comfortable that anyone would want to hear me, right? That I was a good enough singer, albeit an amateur jazz singer. And so for me to be able to do something that I knew I wanted to do and have fun at it and not be plagued by all that discomfort. So I think that's certainly one thing. Or there was a fellow in my practice a couple years ago. He had progressed to the point where he was the chief marketing officer of a very large global organization. And the CEO decided that his senior people should go around the world and give keynote speeches to the employees of that organization to the tune of 1,000 to 3,000 people at a time. And this client of mine was just, he just about quit his job. Goodness. He was so miserable over it. And he had some fear of public speaking on smaller stages, you know, and with smaller groups and leading his teams and that sort of thing. But it wasn't like me, it wasn't debilitating. But when he was asked to do these big keynote speeches, he just couldn't do it. He was going to quit his job. So just about maybe before COVID, or I'm going to guess about 10 months ago or so, got an email from him that he had just done his best keynote ever in front of several thousand people somewhere in the world and was doing fine and was continuing to do the exercises and the work on getting even more comfortable, but he was able to do it. And boy, when you say, what are the results? The result is he didn't quit his job. And I think probably there are lots and lots of people in that situation. Either they won't go for a promotion because it would involve that, or they don't do well, or decide not to continue with the job if it's going to be so miserable for them. I think too, getting over stage fright generalizes. One of my definitions for stage fright is impeded energy. Yeah. And the definition of confidence in the opposite is unimpeded energy. So when my energy is not impeded, then I am free to flow. My energy can run in an outward direction without clamping up. And I think that for me, clearing up my stage fright about singing helped me be freer as a person. Because the impedance that was lodged in my system about, oh, what are they going to think of me? Or I'm making a fool of myself, or what right do I have to do this? Or any number of things that could be behind stage fright can also be operating in other places in people's lives. So there can be a ripple effect there.
How do we unimpede energy?
The energy that I'm talking about is in many circles called subtle energy. Mm-hmm. And in all cultures, forever, people have worked with subtle energy in various ways. Western medicine is probably the only place that is just catching on, that the subtle energy systems are a very real part of our operating systems, and therefore can be intervened with and enhanced and strengthened, and that has then an effect on our mental and emotional and physical systems. The subtle energies I'm talking about are acupuncture, the chakras, the auric field, the electromagnetic field that we can't see, or at least most of us can't see, some of us can, that emanates from our bodies. Those are the subtle energies that I use. Stephanie Eldringhoff, my co-developer of the Rapid Relief Process, uses to intervene with these fight, flight, or freeze responses or other emotional or psychological states through those systems. It's almost like your energy system is the glue that holds those in place, keeps them in your holographic plate. And we really don't know the mechanism of it, but what we do know is that when we use these techniques, the result is that when we look at that, we shine the laser of our consciousness on those points in the holographic plate, it doesn't pop up as a hologram anymore. It doesn't activate. So we don't know enough about these subtle energies. We know they're there. They can be photographed. There are scientists looking at a particular kind of node on the nervous system that seems to follow the path of the acupuncture meridians. You may be aware that the acupuncture meridians, which are channels of energy that run through, they're not visible to us, but there are certain points, there's like 365 points on the acupuncture systems that are more conductive electrically, and you can actually measure that, and they correspond with the place that acupuncturists would put needles if you were doing actual acupuncture. But there are many ways to strengthen and connect the acupuncture meridians, even in the face of that perception that ordinarily would have them out of balance. So it's like counteracting the state, and then that neutralizes it. The same with the chakras and the auric field. One of the exercises in the rapid relief process is called the rapid relief energy sweep, where we sweep the meridians in the direction of their flow, even while you're thinking about this troublesome thing, and also have you expand your perception of your own space, even while you're thinking about this particular thing. And not only does it feel wonderful, but it also diminishes the negative valence on that particular perception.
How does curing stage fright, performance anxiety, imposter syndrome benefit and impact other areas of our life or business? Like, for example, stress management, and other things like that.
If you're freer of these emotional reactions, first of all, you're going to handle situations better. I used the example of a conflict at work. There was somebody in one of my recent classes who wanted to clear up her upset about a conflict at work. And the result was that she was able to attend this very sensitive meeting coming from a whole different place than she would have otherwise. And so the outcome was different. So imagine if we all had the tools when we could recognize that we were hooked by something, to use an old term for activated by something, and we could actually stop and say, wait a minute, I'm going to handle this better if I'm calmer, and use these techniques to calm down and then go into a situation. How many situations would end up differently?
Right.
How many arguments with spouses? How many reactivities to children who aren't behaving? It would be amazing if people came at things with a more centered and grounded perception or approach or whatever, mindset, if you will. So it does generalize that way. And the rapid relief process that Stephanie and I developed, they're not about stage fright. They're about any kind of emotional upset. And we were using them in our practices way long before I had discovered the stage fright that I had. So really applying the rapid relief process or other things similar to that to stage fright is one application of a process that can make a positive difference in any area of life.
You're solving more than just stage fright. You're solving pervasive and general issues.
Yes, and you asked about stress levels. It's definitely a de-stressor, because if you're not activating that cortisol, it's that heightened level of cortisol, right, and adrenaline that is stress. And the domino effect and the fallout of a particular chronic stress is what causes all those physical issues that are related to stress. So since we do have some techniques to intervene with that cortisol response, then that's going to have domino effects in a good way on our physical health as well.
You mentioned the rapid relief process a couple of times. What can you tell us about that in terms of the framework, or what can you share about that?
Sure. It's 6 exercises. Stephanie Eldringhoff and I learned something called thought field therapy 25 years ago, and we've just been partners in this since then. Yeah. And as we went along, we learned all kinds of different interventions, if you will, into the subtle energy systems. And we sat down and picked out, she has a long time marriage and family therapy practice, and I have a long time mental health counseling practice. We picked out the elements or the techniques that we thought were doing the best for as many people as possible, right? The biggest bang for your buck in terms of issues and in terms of people. And we chose 6 exercises, some of which came from thought field therapy originally because they were just so effective, and some that are combinations of other things that neutralize as many issues for as many people as possible and put it into a comprehensive set of exercises, a process, method, techniques that people could learn and apply to themselves so they can make a big difference in how they react to situations on their own. So some of the elements that are involved with these exercises are, as I said, the acupuncture meridians, the chakras, and the auric field. But also there's a left-right brain integration process called EMDR that's used, it has extensive research and is used by therapists to resolve trauma and reactions to past trauma. And so we have incorporated some left-right brain integration. Some of the exercises are based on Qigong, some of the and Tai Chi, which in turn are based on the meridian systems. Sure. So the set of 6 exercises, that is the rapid relief process, comes at it from a lot of different angles. Wow. Because let's say you're upset about, let's say something's going on in your life, right? Let's say you had a fight with somebody and you got your feelings hurt and it's really sticking with you. We don't know where in your energy, what's the best intervention for that particular issue for you at this particular time. So what we do is to go through, especially in the class, we go through these exercises, and if there's a diminishment of your pain about it, then you needed that exercise. If there isn't, you didn't need that exercise. And we do that all the way through. There are 2 exercises that are really the meat of the matter, that cover the most energy imbalances for the most people. And some of the other exercises kind of take care of things that we might miss otherwise.
How is your approach to curing stage fright different than other approaches in the marketplace?
The vast majority of 5 tips for getting over stage fright, or whatever, have to do with more external things, if you will. The energy piece, the piece of the Stage Fright Cure that really is different is that piece where we're dismantling or neutralizing our previous experiences and in emotional states and self-assessment and meanings that are triggering the stage fright response on an involuntary level. Vast majority of what you'll read about or hear about has to do with the voluntary level. Has to do with practice. It has to do with not the audience in their underwear. I mean, I don't think anybody seriously offers that as a technique.
Right.
So the Stage Fright Cure is also a little bit more than just the rapid relief process. So I want to just outline there's 4 stages, and the stages are not like linear stages. They're more like aspect to getting over stage fright. Now, one of them we've already done here because the first one is to get objective about what's going on and to regard the stage fright response as something that's happening in your body, not a personality characteristic. And to be able to get into an observational position, if you will, about that. It's like if you have a cold, you have a cold. Yeah. You're not your cold. True. You're not a person who has colds. Right. You have a cold. It's something that's going on in your system. Or if you have a pain in your thumb, it's over there. I have a pain in my thumb. I am not a person who has thumb pain as something wrong with me because I have a pain in my thumb. I can observe it and I can attribute it to something. And if I can attribute it to something, that gives me the power to do something about it. So that's the first thing. The second element is to create safety in your present day world. Like an analogy there is, and it's a little serious, but if I'm working with someone, for instance, who's in a traumatic relationship, first thing is create safety for that person. Right? Before you do any clearing up of trauma, you want to make sure that person is safe. And that goes with this too. In other words, there are all kinds of ways that are in fact external or not on an energy level that you can create safety for yourself. One of them is practice, of course. But why is that? Not because practice always does the trick, but because your amygdala loves familiarity and certainty. And so if your amygdala perceives that you are familiar and certain about this, whatever it is, it will relax. It won't fire off as much. So I'm very fond of saying you don't have stage fright. Your amygdala has stage fright. Right? Which is really true. And if the first step is to recognize that. Well, I was talking about that 4th grade incident, talking about objectivity. What happened when I cleared up the emotional charge on it, I got objective about it. It's like, oh, this wasn't about me. This wasn't about my failing as a person. This was something that happened that was funny.
Yeah.
So that the first is getting objective. The second is to create safety in all kinds of different ways you can do that. Mental ways, physical ways, the way you arrange the space, the lighting, whatever it might be, to help you feel comfortable in very practical ways. And then the rapid relief process can go even deeper and dismantle those origins of your reaction. And it can also amplify positive ways that you think about yourself, positive outcomes, and the positive perception of things. And as you continue to do all 4 of those elements, you just get more and more comfortable with whatever you're doing.
It would seem that in your work that you're about finding people's confidence as one of the stages of your work. I want to ask you about that. Where does confidence come from for us?
I think you're thinking about it backwards. I think what happens to our natural confidence as we go through our lives. Think about a baby learning to walk. Confidence isn't even an issue. Confidence isn't it. They're going to learn to walk. They're going to fall down a bunch. They're going to get up. They're going to fall down. They're going to get up. And I mentioned that my definition of confidence is unimpeded energy. That baby has unimpeded energy about it. They're just doing what they're doing. And they don't do it perfectly. There's a lot of falling down involved. And it's a learning process. Of course it's a learning process, right? There's no impeded energy there. The baby doesn't stop and go, oh God, I fell down. I don't think I'll ever get up again.
We do that a lot, right?
We do that a lot, don't we? Yeah. And so I think that confidence gets undermined rather than that we develop confidence. So if you think about it in terms of getting everything out of the way that's impeding your confidence, then you can start to think of a lot of different things you can do to enhance and encourage the confidence that's already a potential for everybody, I think.
What you're witnessing right now is me having an epiphany, actually.
Oh, tell me.
Because what I hear you saying, and it makes a lot of sense, is that confidence is not something that we build and work on, and affirmations, and it's not a construct. It's something that we have naturally. We're born with it. It's innate. We all have it. What you're saying is that we are impeding our own confidence, which is a natural state for us.
That's what I think.
Wow. That's an incredible insight, actually, and very empowering when you think about it.
Now, I kind of like that to me is essentially what confidence is. Now, there's another way people use confidence in the sense of certainty and security in something.
Right.
So yes, that part you can build. In other words, when a baby's learning to walk, they're not lacking in confidence. It's a learning process. And at the same time, using confidence in a little different light, every time they start building those muscles and they start to be able to get from here to there without falling over,
right,
they're going to feel more secure in their ability to do that. A voice teacher of mine some time ago said, I was kind of reluctant to go out and actually ask anybody for money to hear me sing.
Yeah. Right.
And he said, Marty, the way you get good is to go gig. And it was like, oh, I thought it was the other way around. I thought you had to be really good first. And that was a revelation to me. It's like, oh yeah, okay. And as I continue to do that, I'm going to get better. And then I'm going to have more confidence in my singing. And that adds to my intrinsic confidence, certainly. But I don't have to have 100% confidence in my singing in order to have intrinsic confidence.
Yeah.
But if I don't have intrinsic confidence, if my God-given original confidence is somehow disrupted, that's going to have an effect on my intrinsic confidence and in my confidence in what I do or don't do. Circling back, I think that's part of what imposter syndrome is having learned somewhere along the way not to have confidence in what you do at the level that you're doing it at a realistic observational level. Like, a baby doesn't walk perfectly right off the bat.
Can you give us an example of a person that you worked with who may have had deathly stage fright and were able to turn them around to find huge confidence?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about again that CMO guy that I talked about earlier. He was just stopped in his tracks. He would shake, he would lose his train of thought, not remember what he was supposed to cover in a meeting. His stomach would be flip-flopping or nauseous. All of those symptoms, he was a wreck. Here's another point too that kind of goes back to a question you asked earlier about the ripple effect on the rest of our lives. He not only was internally having a severe reaction to any kind of performance, but it also was keeping him up at night. He would worry about a meeting or a presentation for months before he'd have to do this.
Goodness.
It would make him tense around his family. Reported a couple of times that he'd snapped at his kids in ways that he didn't, because he was so concerned inside. And then I worked with him, I'm going to say upwards of a year on the energetic side, but also on the create safety side, and also about all the things I just mentioned. And one of the things about him was that he thought that he needed to be Tony Robbins. Right. And he wasn't Tony Robbins. He was this laid back, lanky, really nice guy and very unassuming. And he had just climbed the ranks in marketing and sales because he was good at it. He wasn't trying to be anybody fancy. But when it came to speaking, all of a sudden he had this expectation about it, that he couldn't just be himself on stage. He had to be somebody. And
right.
And not only did he not feel like he could do that, he didn't want to do that because his personal integrity would be out of line if he got up and tried to do that. So it took him a while to get convinced that he could have his own style of presenting himself, in his own personality could come out, and he didn't have to be somebody he wasn't. Yeah. That was the one I mentioned earlier where he was having all those difficulties, and then eventually he was able to keep his job, or he was able to decide not to quit his job, right? Because he had to get up and give keynote speeches for thousands of people at a time. So that was a big turnaround for him.
That's an amazing case study, actually. And one of the things that I learned from that is that you even said it, that you worked with him for some time, that getting over stage fright, it would seem, is, you mentioned it, happens in increments. It's not a wholesale innovative change overnight. You do one exercise or one set of exercises on a weekend and then boom, you're done. Would you agree with that?
For the most part, yes. I have definitely had people turn around on a dime.
Oh, really?
Yep. I had a high school young woman who had fear of singing, and she wanted to go into musical theater, at least that she was thinking of it. And I met with her, I think 3 times, and we nailed it. She went off and sang. On the other hand, so as I said, these techniques are not just for performing. A friend of mine, I was telling her about these techniques way early on, and she said, I have a fear of spiders. And we couldn't budget for the longest time. For quite a few sessions, we were not getting very far, which is highly unusual with these kinds of techniques. And so finally I said, well, pinpoint exactly when your fear of spiders started. And she had told me about that before. I mean, that was a standard question that I would want to know. But tell me again, when did this start? And she burst into tears, totally surprised by her own reaction, and started telling me about a situation where she'd been bullied on the bus the first day of middle school. Some jerk kid on the bus came up and started punching her in the arm and wouldn't let go. And nobody did anything about it. And she called her mom, and the mom came to school, and then she had to live with this kid in middle school for another 3 years. It took us quite a while to dismantle that for her, because there were so many aspects of the situation. There was the bullying incident, avoiding him for 3 years in school, all of that. And the only reason we know that it was connected to spiders was that every time we cleared up some aspect of that episode in her life, her fear of spiders diminished. The only reason we could figure out what the connection was is that kid was creepy. He crept up on her, and he was like slimy, and he was sneaky, that kid. Yeah. So that's another example of that kind of perceptual similarity. Even though the circumstances are totally different, there was an underpinning of similarity for her brain that would send her into a fear response when she saw creepy, slimy, sneaky.
I want to get out of the realm of stage fright for just a moment, and I want to ask you just a few questions around lessons learned and just general advice, things like that. If you could outline your own 1, 2, 3 success formula, what would that be?
Number one, I would say trust yourself. I would say be sensitive to what's true about you and trust it. One of the exercises in the rapid relief process has a phrase attached to it. People actually put some vibration into certain acupuncture points while we're doing it. But the phrase is, even if this is true, whatever it is that people are wanting to clear up, I deeply and completely love and accept myself with compassion and respect. And that phrase, sometimes people just tear up at saying that phrase because it's something that it's an attitude toward ourselves that we're usually not taught to have. I deeply and completely love and accept myself with compassion and respect. That's a phrase that came from thought field therapy, from Dr. Roger Callahan, who originated thought field therapy. We put the compassion and respect part at the end, and I really love that because compassion, if you're on yin and yang, it's the yin side of positive self-regard, and respect is the yang side of positive self-regard. So that attitude toward ourselves helps us to not only recognize what's true about us, but also to trust it. Number 2, notice what you're drawn to. And in the same spirit of what I said, number 1, notice what you're drawn to and pursue it. And I think the third is to recognize that everything's a process, and not only trust yourself, but trust the process. If I look back on my life, I can totally see the pieces of my life that got me to here. I was very insecure as a young person. Don't get me wrong. I was in the theater club in high school. Then I majored in drama and speech and drama in college, but I wasn't very good at it. Then I got a job teaching speech and drama at a private school here in Seattle. And then my then husband had an affair with my best friend, and my marriage blew up, and I went through a terrible time.
Wow.
So I went back to school, of course, and studied psychology. What else do you do?
Right.
Then I went to graduate school, and I didn't have anything to do with theater or speech or anything or performing. I wasn't doing any of that. And then I started my private practice, and then I tried to learn to sing, and then I learned energy psychology, and then all of those things, you can see how they all wove together. But I didn't know that at the time when I was going through those things. I didn't know how they were contributing to where I would get to. And so for a younger person who is in that process, I would say trust the process and realize that whatever's going on has a benefit.
What is the greatest lesson learned, either in life or business, that you could share with someone else?
That there's a place within us of happiness and joy, that there's a place of knowing in us that's not physical or mental or emotional, but it's about our energy. It's contacting our energy and what we bring to any situation and how we choose to feel, that we can tap into that energy and bring it to our lives. I'm actually not even talking about energy like acupuncture and chakras and that sort of thing. I use those all the time. I'm talking about a really basic sense of joy in life that's accessible to us when we know where to look and when we get all the other things that get in the way out of the way.
What do you want most for your life?
I have a wonderful life. But just in terms of goals, I want the rapid relief process out there. I want people to know about this, not just the specific techniques, although I certainly want people to know the specific techniques, but the realization that you can actually work with your own energy and shift your perceptions and how you show up in the world for yourself and for other people. It isn't just a luck of the draw. It isn't just rolling the dice.
Right.
You're not helpless. There are ways for us to work with ourselves to improve ourselves and our life and our sense of joy in the world that I just mentioned in a very real way.
Where can people find you online?
Yes. StageFright.com is where you can find me online. And also the information page for the Rapid Relief from Stress and Distress class that I've been talking about, this 2-hour online Zoom class that I'm currently offering for free. The information page for that is stagefright.com/rapid relief.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you?
No, I think you've asked me everything under the sun. I just want to say I just absolutely love doing this. You're a terrific person just to have a conversation with and feel really comfortable with, and I appreciate that so much. And I really do want people to go to stagefright.com, whether they have stage fright or not, and look at the page for the free Rapid Relief from Stress and Distress class and sign up for one of the future upcoming dates that are available there, because it's so profound that we can make changes in our lives and our other people's lives and how situations turn out when we have the right tools to do it.
Marti, this has been amazing. My eyes have been opened during our time together here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your life to spend it with me and sharing a little bit of your experience and your wisdom. For everyone out there, her website is www.stagefright.com. Find Marti, connect with her. She's an incredible human being. Marti, thank you again.
Thank you so much, too. It's been a delight.